La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah alayhi salatu wassalam. Let's make our intentions sincerely for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. Today we're going to talk about the consequences of making a mistake in one's marriage contract such that it wouldn't be valid, or having sexual relations, illegitimate sexual relations before marriage, and what that results in. So, to be more blunt, we're going to talk about the illegitimate child that is known as waladu zina. The illegitimate child, so the child that is not legitimate, is otherwise known as the bastard child, or they have other names for this illegitimate child. Names that are not slang, proper names, but we'll stick with the illegitimate child. The illegitimate child is the child that was conceived outside of wedlock. So Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala revealed to the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam to mention to the people that they, with regards to their women, istahlaltum furujahunna bi kalimatillah, meaning that you sought, or rather Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala made it be that it would be permissible for men to engage in sexual relations with women, their wives, through a marriage contract, through a nikah. This is how it would be halal for them to engage in sexual relations with their wives and to have children. And therefore it is prohibited and sinful to have sexual relations otherwise, and hence for a child to be born outside of wedlock with details. So, for a child to be born outside of wedlock, this may be due to adultery or fornication. So, fornication meaning this person has never been married and he fornicated with a woman, or likewise, from her side, and then a child was born, or that the two thought that they were married, but in actual fact, they were apostates. They were not Muslims. And therefore, the child becomes an illegitimate child. Being an apostate would mean that the apparent marriage contract that he seemed to have had was not valid. And so the child conceived in this period would be illegitimate. So what is the difference between an illegitimate child and a legitimate child in terms of rights? Why is there this difference? Is there any blame upon the child? No, there is no blame upon the child. But what are the implications? What are the consequences with regards to the religious rules? The illegitimate child is not attributed to the father. So let's say there was no marriage contract, neither apparently nor in reality there was no marriage contract at all. Two people who are not married, they engaged in sexual relations and this produced a child. The mother is considered the biological mother and the father is considered the biological father. But religiously, he would not be called the father, because calling a man man a father of a child, this passes on certain rights to the child. As for if they were not married, the male and the female, they were not married, then this child that is conceived, this child that is born, is not attributed to the father. Meaning we don't say that this is the son of such and such man, or this is the daughter of such and such man. Even though the man may consider, he would consider this female, this young girl, his flesh and blood. And likewise, this male that was the result of sexual relations between this man and this woman, the male's mother, the man would consider this boy from his own flesh and blood. But we don't say he is his son. And we don't say she, the little girl, is his daughter. And what this also indicates, and it is the case, that when this boy grows older, and when this girl becomes older, usually, if the biological father, who is not religiously the father, if he dies, then his wealth is not inherited by this boy or this girl, because religiously he is not his son and she is not his daughter. Now this may be in the case where the man and the woman who engaged in haram sexual relations, either because they were not married or because one of them, let's say now, for example, the male, let's stick with the male, he was a kafir. He thought he was a Muslim. He had the incorrect belief, so he was an apostate. And so when he engaged in what seemed like a marriage contract with this Muslimah, it was not valid, because a Muslim woman is only allowed to marry a Muslim male. A Muslim woman is only allowed to marry one Muslim male. Whereas the Muslim male is allowed to marry the Muslim female, the Christian female, and the Jewish female. And his marriage contract would be valid. As for her, the Muslimah, she's only allowed to marry a Muslim man. So, if he was an apostate, he didn't have the correct belief, and she did, then the child that is produced between them is considered an illegitimate child. And remember, there's no blame on the child, because it's not the child's fault. It's not the child's fault that the father had a bad belief, his biological father. But there are certain things that result from that. Like we mentioned, this child would not inherit from this man, from whose liquid mani, this boy was created. So they have no right to the inheritance. If the biological father was to die, for example, and he left behind 2 legitimate sons and 2 illegitimate sons, so he had 4 children. When he was younger, he either wasn't married because there was no marriage contract at all, or he did apparently do a marriage contract, but he was an apostate. And in that period after that, while still he was a non-Muslim, he engaged in sexual relations with what he thought was his wife, but religiously was not. And she bore 2 children, 2 boys. They are considered illegitimate children. They are considered, in other words, each one is considered a bastard child. So when they grow up, they will not inherit. they will not inherit. Then later on, let's say he learned the correct belief, and after learning the correct belief, he renewed his, or he did his marriage contract with this woman who has already bore him 2 children, but they are not considered his. Then after that, they have 2 children within this marriage. So 2 of the children, the eldest 2 boys, they are illegitimate children, and the 2 that were born within the marriage contract, now that their father is a Muslim, these are legitimate children. So he dies. He leaves behind 4 children that have the same mother. 2 of them are, the oldest, are illegitimate. They will not inherit anything. They're not allowed to inherit. When his inheritance is split up, whether it's through the courts or however it is, as Muslims, we know that we are not allowed to give those 2 children anything from this man's inheritance. He is not considered their father. As for those 2 that are younger, meaning the ones that were born later, in the valid marriage contract, they deserve part of the inheritance. So if it was known that a person he made a mistake in the past, and he committed a zina, and that resulted in a child, then this child is not considered his religiously. This child will not inherit from him. This child is not allowed to inherit from him. Neither is the actual mother of her son or daughter. Neither is she allowed to, after her husband, let's say he embraces Islam, neither is she allowed to force the issue of saying, yes, my son deserves. No, because he doesn't deserve. This is munkar. This is not permissible for that boy to take that money. And likewise, if this boy becomes older, he needs to be told the truth. Whenever that is, he needs to be told, so that rights of people are not breached. Is there a difference between a bastard child being a male or a female? And this is where there are more details, if the illegitimate child was a female, then in addition to not being eligible to the inheritance, she would have to cover her hair in front of her biological father. So same scenario, either they had her when they were not married, they were both Muslims, for example, either they had her when they were not married, or they had her whilst the man was a kafir. So if this woman had a daughter, then she is not considered the daughter of this man. Rather, in the scholars, they call her al-makhluqa. Al-makhluqatu min ma'i zinahu. Yani al-makhluqatu min mani zinahu. She is literally the creation, al-makhluqa, or if you want to be more literal, the creature. But she's not to blame. It's just the way that they named. Here al-makhluqa, she is the creation, this girl, min ma'i, from the mani of her biological father's zina. So they don't call her his daughter. They don't say ibnatuhu. La, they say al-makhluqatu min ma'i zinahu. The creation from the fluid of his zina. So she to him is considered an ajnabiyya. So if there are people today who do not have the correct belief in Allah, and so if he, for example, is not a Muslim, he thinks he is, but he's not, because he doesn't have the correct belief in Allah. If apparently they do a marriage contract for him, with a woman, and because of engaging in intercourse, she has a daughter. Then when she grows up to an age where she is desired, whatever age that may be, even before pubescence, then she has to cover up in front of him. He may treat her like his daughter because he doesn't know any better, and he didn't learn. She becomes pubescent and he thinks that this is his daughter, walking around the house without her scarf, showing her arm, for example, even part of her shin. He thinks it's his daughter, but religiously it's not considered his daughter. She is like an ajnabiyya. She is an ajnabiyya to him. And he is not allowed to, she will not inherit from him. He is not allowed to look at her hair, just like any ajnabiyya on the street. And he cannot be alone with her, because that is khalwa. The Shafi'is went a step further and they said it's not his daughter. They even said it's not haram, not that they encourage this, but just to make a point. They said she is not his daughter such that if he was to marry her, the marriage contract would be valid. To this extent. So she doesn't inherit from him like the biological son. He wouldn't inherit from him. She she is an ajnabiyya. Someone with whom the marriage contract for him would be valid. Some people, they might say that, well, it's like marrying his own daughter because she was created, apparently, she was created from his mani, from his fluid. So that's his flesh and blood. Religiously, this doesn't have, according to the Shafi'is at least, it doesn't have consideration. They said he is permitted to marry her, although it would be disliked and not sinful. So this is a very serious issue. A very serious issue. If a person is born as an illegitimate child, then their lineage is lost. They cannot say, I am the son of, and then mention their biological father's name. And they don't inherit from them. So people nowadays, let's say, who have lots of property, sorry, they have lots of property. They might want to hand down the family business, and they write it in their will that it will go to who they think is their son or their daughter. This inheritance is not valid. It is not valid. In our times, it's been said that on a large scale, ضاعت الأنساب, that many of the lineages have been lost, have been cut away. Because the one who commits apostasy, al-kufr, and for example, he engages in sexual intercourse with a woman who he may consider his wife, that resulting child is not considered his son or daughter. Rather, they are attributed to the mother. They are attributed to the mother. And the lineage doesn't travel down the mother, except in one special case. Usually, though, the lineage does not travel down the mother. You say, Fulan ibn Fulan ibn Fulan ibn Fulan. Ibn Fulan, not Fulan ibn Fulan bint Fulan. The exception is the case of Lady Fatima, where the lineage of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, rather his offspring, the lineage passes down through her. So the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, his sons, they passed away when they were young. Lady Fatima is his daughter, and then her sons are Al-Hassan and Al-Hussein. So the lineage passes down through them. So a mansub, someone who is related to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, they would say, I am the daughter of, and then they would say their father's name. I am the daughter of such and such man who is the son of the son of the son of the, who is all the way up to who is the son of Al-Hussein or Al-Hassan, who is the son of Lady Fatima, who is the daughter of the Messenger of Allah. Otherwise, it doesn't pass, it doesn't travel through. The lineage does not travel through a female. So if a man and a woman, in inverted commas, married, and then the woman gave birth to a girl, and after this they realized that they were apostates, then immediately what they need to do is they need to embrace al-Islam. But they, let's say they don't know. They don't know, did the apostasy occur before or after the child was conceived? So they got married and they had a child. And they know that in the past they didn't have the correct belief, but they are not sure. When is it? Was it before we got married that we didn't have the correct belief? Or was it after we married? When was it? Because if it was before, if they knew that they had the incorrect belief before they got married, and then they corrected themselves and then they got married, then the marriage contract would be valid. And then conceiving that child would also be, the child would be considered legitimate. As for if they got married and then they committed kufr, then they're apostates. And then a child was conceived, this child would be an illegitimate child. So if there was a man and a woman that married, and the woman gave birth to a girl, for example, and after she gave birth to this girl, they realized that they were apostates, but they did not know whether the apostasy occurred from them before conceiving the child or after. They were not sure. In this case, the scholars said that this girl is considered their daughter. So in this case, she would be a legitimate child. They don't know. They don't know when the apostasy occurred, before or after. So she would be considered a legitimate child. Many people, they ask the question, they say, well, what about my parents? They say that my parents, I don't think they had the correct belief when they had me. And so I think that I might be an illegitimate child. So what should I do? So here the scholars mention that, for example, if there is a particular country, so they elaborated, they said if there's a particular country where many people are known in a particular period of time to be committing kufr, and one's parents are from that country, and one thinks as a child, as the parent's child, one thinks that it's likely and it's apparent that his parents had committed kufr. And so he doubts that, then am I a legitimate child or not? Then here what one needs to say is that I am not certain. This person who is doubting and doesn't know, is not sure. This person says in this situation, the scholars explain, the one says that I'm not certain that my parents were upon kufr. I'm not certain. Do I know with 100%? I wasn't there. I wasn't present at that time when all this was going on. And I did not hear kufr from them. So I build my belief upon certainty that they were married and they were Muslims at the time, so I am legitimate. I am legitimate. Which means what? I will inherit. If it's a girl, then she can be alone with her father, because it's her father. There's no issue of khalwa. She doesn't need to cover her hair in front of him. She doesn't need to cover her arms in front of him. She's not considered an ajnabiyya in front of him. He is her wali, meaning that he will have the right to marry her off, and so on. So one thinks, well, because he doesn't know, even though it seems likely to have been the case that maybe they had been upon kufr when they had me. But one doesn't know. As for if the two people that supposedly married came to know that their apostasy had occurred before conception, before conceiving the child, and hence they know now that even their marriage contract was not valid, then their son or their daughter is an illegitimate child. He and she are not attributed to the father, to this biological father. He is not her mahram, so she can't travel that certain distance with him. She can't travel with him claiming that he is her mahram. And likewise, she is like an ajnabiyya. He cannot be alone with her. It's not considered his daughter. And she will not inherit from him. And also he cannot marry her off. He is not her wali. He doesn't have al-wilaya. He is not considered her guardian. Now, if it was said that if someone says that I learned that I was not a Muslim at the time that we had our daughter, or at the time that what I thought was my wife at the time that she gave birth, I found out that later on, I found out that back then I wasn't a Muslim. I started to learn, then I realized that then I wasn't a Muslim. So this child is an illegitimate child. And a person says, I understand that she has to cover in front of me. So the scholars mention here that one way in which to reconcile this situation is that this man who is in the position, if you will, hypothetically, of the father, apparently of the father, what he does is he embraces al-Islam, obviously. That's the first thing he does. He embraces al-Islam. Then what does he do? He marries the mother of the child. They would usually be living together anyway, as husband and wife. But he embraces al-Islam so that he stops being a kafir. And then he conducts a marriage contract with the mother of this female, which is his biologically would be considered his daughter. And then after he marries this female with whom he had sexual relations before, and the result was this daughter, he would marry her and consummate the marriage. So consummate the marriage meaning now engaging in sexual intercourse with his wife, and then this daughter, the daughter of his wife, would be considered his Rabibah. So not his daughter, his Rabibah. Rabibah meaning his daughter, his wife's daughter, his stepdaughter. Now, after consummating the marriage, he can be alone with her. It's not haram for him to be alone with her, because it's like his daughter now. And if she reveals her hair, then that's fine also. She doesn't have to cover up in front of him. This is one way to reconcile the situation, rather than keep it as it is and being arrogant and saying, no, she's my daughter, and so on, and why would my daughter have to cover it in front of me, and this and that. Instead of saying that, and that stems from what? Stems from ignorance, because this person didn't know. A person is not allowed to engage in any transaction without knowing ما أحل الله منه وما حرم, without knowing what Allah made permissible and what Allah made impermissible. So this person, he was he was in a rush to do something without checking the religious judgment, without learning the correct belief, without, and now he faces the consequences. So this is a way out. This is a way out. However, he is not her wali. In this case, where this girl becomes his rabibah, his stepdaughter, his wife's daughter. Yes, he can be alone with her. He can, like a father and daughter would, as normal, and he can see her hair. She doesn't have to cover up in front of him. She doesn't have to wear a hijab in front of him. But he is still not given the right of marrying her off. He is not her guardian. He cannot be her guardian. Even if the situation is slightly reconciled, he cannot be her guardian. And still, she will not inherit from him if he dies. She will not inherit from him if he dies. To her, who is this man? This is not her father. She would say, this is my mother's husband. This is my mother's husband, because they had me, my mother had me out of wedlock. Okay, this is in the, yes. So the illegitimate child, the female, who is born out of wedlock, is referred to as al-makhluqatu min ma'i zinahu. Al-makhluqatu min ma'i zinahu. As for in the Hanafi school, a lot of this is similar, except that al-makhluqatu min ma'i zinahu, if two people were not married, they were Muslims but they were not married, they engaged in zina, haram, sexual intercourse, and a child was the result. This is an illegitimate child, whether male or female. But in the Hanafi school, unlike the Shafi'i school, a marriage contract is not valid between the two, between biological father and daughter. Even though she is al-makhluqatu min ma'i zinahu, she is this creation that has been produced from the fluid of her biological father's zina. Despite that, a marriage contract is not valid between the two. And there is a big debate between the Shafi'is and the Hanafis in this issue. The Shafi'i said she's illegitimate, so she's an ajnabiyya. It's his fault for not learning. And the Shafi'i said, but we're not encouraging it, but if it was the case that he married her, just to show how much she is not his daughter. He said if he was to marry her, then even though he might think of her as his flesh and blood, she's created from his mani, his sperm, his fluid. But because she is an illegitimate child, the marriage contract would be valid. The Hanafis said no. The Hanafis, they rejected this completely. They said no, he's not permitted to marry her. Not that he would want to anyway. We're not saying that. We're saying that in the hypothetical scenario that a marriage contract took place, what did the scholars say? The Hanafis said no, that wouldn't be valid. And he therefore, what follows on from that in the Hanafi school is that he would be allowed to see her hair, because a marriage contract is not valid between them. So it would be, for want of a better word, someone who is like his daughter. But still, she does not inherit from him because she is an illegitimate child. And we'll finish with a question that sometimes people may ask when they learn some of these details. They say that if there was a man and a woman that conducted a marriage contract, a Muslim man, so he's actually a Muslim, and a Muslim woman, and they conducted a marriage contract in front of two witnesses, and what was apparent is that the two witnesses are Muslims, but in reality one of them was an apostate. So up to here, you see why it's good to have more witnesses, to have just so that you can be safe. Anyway, let's listen to the judgment then. So and then they had children. This Muslim man, this Muslim woman, and you need to have two male witnesses for two male Muslim witnesses for the validity of the contract. Otherwise, if you have one male Muslim witness, and you have a marriage contract, this is not valid. This is not valid. So, if a Muslim man and a Muslim woman, they want to marry, and they have two male Muslim witnesses, or what seems like two male Muslim witnesses, and one of them in actual fact is a kafir. Later on he comes, after many years, he comes and says, do you know, when you two got married, and you took us two, me and that other person, and only us two, we acted as a witness. Not like what they do nowadays, where they get the bride and the groom to sit on the stage or somewhere else, and the guardian, in front of everybody, he says, I give my daughter's hand in marriage to you. Or they appoint someone and he says it, even though there's no real need for that person to be appointed there. This is, for some people, a money-making scheme for some of these imams. Anyway, going off topic there. But if somebody, so if there's a Muslim man and a Muslim male, a Muslim man and a Muslim female, and they want to get married, and so they have two witnesses that are apparently two Muslims, two men that are Muslims. Many years later, one of them comes and says, I realized, I started learning the religious knowledge, and I realized that back then I used to be a non-Muslim. I used to believe such and such. So what's that now? That's down to one witness. And the marriage contract would only be valid if there are 2 male Muslim witnesses. What about the children now? Are the children considered to be illegitimate children, or are the children still attributed to the father? The answer is here that they are still attributed to the father. They are still attributed to the father. So their lineage is intact. They are legitimate children. What do we say about the marriage contract? Do they need to repeat the marriage contract? That's for another time. And that's after a review, inshallah, we'll get the answer. But this is one of the issues that you can imagine many people ask about. This is why usually it's good to take by precaution and do the marriage contract in front of many people. Even if it's in the Hanafi school, if someone is trying to renew their marriage contract, then instead of doing it in front of 2 males, do it in front of 3. Do it in front of 3. Because one of them might not, Allahu A'lam, Allah knows best. So that's important. That's important for a person to do that. What if? Lots of what ifs. So these are some details about the illegitimate child. And you see, it's important because there are huquq, there are rights that must not be breached. So if someone knows that there is a haram taking place, then unless one fears a greater harm occurring by them speaking out, which you can imagine actually. Imagine someone's on their deathbed and he's saying, I'm going to give my son everything. But you know this person to have the incorrect belief. You know them because you've spoken to them many times. And if you say, Allahu A'lam, if you say, no, this is not valid, and this person's on his deathbed, and his family are around him, and you say, it's not valid, you can't give it to him because you're a kafir, and this child does not inherit from you, that might cause a greater harm. It might cause a much, much greater harm. So depending on the situation. But this is something that if it's within our control, then we have to put a stop to it. Then we have to put a stop to it. This is why the nikah is a very important matter. This is why it's important not to give your daughter who is learned to someone who is not learned. Because ultimately, what would he be doing? Committing zina. And then the children that she bears, the children that are born as a result of that, they would not be attributed to the biological father. So when this biological father dies, and if your daughter is left alone with her children, then her children won't inherit anything from him. And she also, because they were not married, what will she inherit from an ajnabi man? And this makes life tough. Yes, people are not, the perfect believer is not greedy or, doesn't seek the inheritance, praying that someone dies so I can get inheritance. No, of course not. But it's a way, it's something that makes life work. And it's some people, they pass away and they pass on. They pass on some of their wealth. And then these people, they will pass away and they pass on some of their wealth, and like this. So it becomes difficult for a mother and her children. This is why the scholars say there is mazid ihtiyat. Mazid ihtiyat. There is extra precaution when it comes to a nikah. And who gives one's daughter away? And who is appointed to give one's daughter away? And to whom one's daughter is given away to? Inshallah, next week we will continue with, hopefully, either transactions or we will go through another chapter, but in the Hanafi school. Today, unfortunately, I hadn't prepared I wasn't able to prepare, subhanallah, something in the Hanafi school. So this is why we went through this that we went through today. It's linked to transactions a little bit. One more thing is that, if I can just bring it up here, just a moment. Oh, yeah. Oops. So when it comes to illegitimate children, the children of a Christian couple, for example, the children of a Christian couple, for example, or the children of a Jewish couple, the judgment about them is that we do not consider them illegitimate children. So the rule is that if a Christian woman, for example, marries a Christian man, or a Jewish woman marries a Jewish man, then both of them, then we consider whatever they consider as a nikah, then we consider the children that come from that to be legitimate. So what they consider to be a nikah, then we consider their children to be legitimate children. And whatever they consider to be a zina, then we consider that zina too. So we don't call the child that is born to two Christians, we don't call it a bastard child. We don't call it an illegitimate child. So if a male, a Christian man, marries a Christian woman, then we would say that she is halal for him. Meaning that we don't call that sexual relation zina. So their inheritance, when they inherit, that inheritance is valid. Whether it was a Christian with a Christian, or a Jew with a Jew, or a Majusi with a Majusi, fire worshipper with a fire worshipper. All the original kuffar, it is like this for them.